It was supposed to be a routine transport across the frozen wilderness of Siberia, a simple journey on a train loaded with scholars, soldiers, and secrets. But somewhere between Manchuria and Moscow, something ancient began to thaw. Buried in ice for millions of years, it should have remained undisturbed. But curiosity, as always, was stronger than caution. What boarded the train wasn't just a fossil, it was a memory, a force, a presence that could watch through your eyes and erase your soul. Shot on a recycled set with a bare-bones crew and a shoestring budget, Horror Express should have vanished into cinematic obscurity, but it didn't. Instead, it became a strange relic, a film too smart to be pulpy, too eerie to be ignored, a mix of classic horror, sci-fi, paranoia, and existential dread, all confined within a creaking train slicing through a snowstorm. And behind the screen, things weren't any less chilling. A grieving actor on the verge of quitting, a monster inspired by forbidden science, religious censors who didn't understand the ending, and a camera that might have captured something it wasn't supposed to. What exactly was this film trying to say? Was it just a monster movie, or a parable about control, consciousness, and the price of knowledge? These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Horror Express. 1972. Fact 1. They built a train that didn't move. Most of Horror Express takes place aboard a train crossing the Siberian tundra. It seems obvious then that the filmmakers would shoot on a moving train, or at least a set with full mobility. But they didn't. What you're watching isn't even a train. In reality, the entire train was constructed from leftover sets inside a soundstage in Madrid, Spain. It was built in segments: one corridor, 2 cabins, a luggage room, all reused, redressed, and relit for different scenes. Whenever the script required the camera to follow someone walking from car to car, the crew would simply shuffle the walls, rotate props, and change the lighting angle. The illusion of travel was created entirely through clever blocking and sound design, rattling metal, faint whistles, and low tremors layered in post-production. Why go to such lengths? Money. The production couldn't afford to rent or film on a real train, and transporting cast and crew across Spain in winter was out of the question. Instead, they opted for creativity over cash. The most surreal part? The actors had to fake the movement of the train, rocking slightly in sync, holding onto railings, even timing their footsteps with the sound department's cues. A single mistimed sway would ruin the shot. So yes, Horror Express is a movie about a journey, Tauf, shot entirely in place. The train never left the station, but something else did. Fact 2. He came to quit. He left with a legacy. Peter Cushing wasn't supposed to be on that train. Not mentally, not emotionally. When filming began, Cushing had just lost his beloved wife, Helen, after decades of marriage. They were inseparable. He was shattered. The grief was so overwhelming that when he arrived in Madrid for the shoot, he told the producers he couldn't go on. He was ready to return home to mourn in silence. But Christopher Lee stepped in. More than a co-star, Lee was a close friend. He sat with Cushing that evening, not to pressure him, but to talk, to listen, to remind him that perhaps working together again could help not heal, but soothe. Cushing agreed. He stayed. And in staying, he delivered one of his most refined late-career performances. Elegant, weary, emotionally charged. Look closely at his eyes in the quieter scenes. There's a heaviness behind them that no acting can fake. It's real. In interviews, Lee later admitted that he had feared Cushing wouldn't make it through the shoot, but he did. Not just with strength, but with grace. Horror Express wasn't just another horror film in Cushing's filmography. It was the moment he chose life. Through cinema. Fact 3. It's not a mummy. It's something worse. Marketing for Horror Express made it look like just another mummy flick. Posters showed a frozen, hairy corpse with glowing eyes. The title itself conjured images of ancient tombs, curses, and undead rituals. But that's not what the film is about. The creature found in the ice isn't a mummy, not in the traditional sense. It's not a reanimated corpse, but a host body for something far more disturbing, an alien intelligence. One that can jump from mind to mind, absorb knowledge, and leave behind only empty, white-eyed shells. The inspiration came not from Egyptian mythology, but from H.P. Lovecraft and speculative science fiction. The screenplay was reportedly influenced by The Thing from Another World and older Soviet sci-fi ideas about collective memory and parasitic consciousness. The monster, in essence, is a mind thief, a being of pure thought, trapped in ice for eons. desperate to learn and to escape. This twist changed everything. What starts as a creature feature slowly morphs into an existential horror story about what it means to think, to remember, to lose yourself. The audience came expecting a shuffling corpse. They got a cosmic predator instead. Fact 4. The eyes were more than effects. The creature's glowing eyes became one of the film's signature visuals, a burning red stare that paralyzed victims and bled them of memory and identity. But the effect wasn't made using any post-production techniques. No animation, no optical overlays. It was entirely physical and oddly dangerous. The glow came from tiny lights rigged inside the mask's eye sockets, wired to external batteries. But the materials were crude. The heat generated by the bulbs often became unbearable. The actor inside the suit could barely see and would frequently sweat through the prosthetics. On multiple occasions, the mask had to be removed mid-scene to avoid fainting. The steam effect rising around the eyes? That was real too. Crew members used dry ice and cigarette smoke to enhance the menace, often wafting it manually just out of frame. The most eerie part? The red glow wasn't consistent. It flickered, dimmed, pulsed unintentionally, and the director kept it all. He believed the instability made the creature feel even less human, as if its power wasn't entirely under control. What started as a budget workaround turned into one of the film's most haunting motifs. The monster's eyes didn't just see you, they consumed you. Fact 5. A nightmare disguised as a science lesson. In one of the film's most memorable sequences, the doctors perform an autopsy on a victim and discover that the creature has absorbed the man's brain tissue, leaving the surface smooth, the grooves erased. It's disturbing and completely fabricated. But here's the twist. The concept wasn't pulled from horror movies. It was inspired by real neuroscience. One of the screenwriters had read a speculative theory that suggested if a being could absorb synaptic patterns, it might learn everything a brain knows without retaining the physical brain. It was pure fringe science, unprovable. But they turned it into horror. To create the visual, the prop department used a cow brain coated in gelatin, then gradually shaved down the folds using hot water and sculpting tools. The result was a glistening, unnatural surface, deeply unsettling because it looked so organic. The doctor's reaction in the scene? Not entirely acting. At least one take captured genuine discomfort from the actors who hadn't been warned what the processed brain would look like. Horror Express disguised its monster behind scientific language, but make no mistake, it's body horror of the highest order. Fact 6. The cosmic horror came from a lost story. Most audiences assume Horror Express was a standalone script and original idea cooked up for low-budget thrills. But the truth is, it was based on something far more obscure. Who Goes There? The same novella that inspired The Thing. Yes, the same seed of paranoia, identity theft, and Arctic terror that shaped John Carpenter's 1982 classic had already bloomed in this Spanish-British production a decade earlier. While The Thing leaned into isolation and gore, Horror Express took a more cerebral route, blending religious themes, class tensions, and Cold War metaphors, all within a train speeding through the snow. But here's where it gets weird. The filmmakers didn't officially license the story. They merely borrowed the concept, claiming inspiration rather than adaptation. It was a legal gray zone. At the time, the original story had fallen into ambiguous copyright status in Europe, allowing reinterpretations like this to emerge. And so Horror Express became a kind of unofficial cousin to The Thing, a film haunted not just by its monster, but by a shared literary ancestor. Two stories, two creatures, one terrifying question. What if the person next to you isn't who you think they are? Fact 7. A budget so low, it needed a miracle. Horror Express looks far more expensive than it actually was. Wide shots of snowy wilderness, long train corridors, crowd scenes with soldiers, glowing effects, it all feels cinematic. But the truth is, the budget was barely over $300,000. That number was laughable even in 1972. So how did they do it? Co-director Eugenio Martin leaned on two things: ingenuity and favors. Most of the cast worked for reduced fees, especially Cushing and Lee, who took the roles more for friendship than money. The train set was recycled from an old Spanish Western. The exterior shots of the locomotive chugging through snow? They were miniatures, filmed in a refrigerated room with flour for snow and cotton for smoke. The soldiers were local extras, mostly unpaid. The costumes came from leftover military stock. Even the rifles were wooden props, painted black, with added sound effects in post. But here's the genius. Instead of hiding the limitations, the filmmakers leaned into them. The tight corridors added claustrophobia. The dim lighting masked cheap props. The lack of movement forced more dialogue-driven suspense. And the miracle? It worked. Against all odds, Horror Express doesn't feel cheap. It feels confined, controlled. Like a nightmare in a boxcar, you can't escape. They had no money, but they had vision, and that was worth more. Fact 8. The music was too good for this movie. When Horror Express opens, it hits you. The eerie strings, the dissonant tones, the building tension. It feels like a full orchestral score from a studio 10 times the size. And for good reason. The composer, John Kakavas, wasn't a horror regular. He was a classically trained musician who had just started making a name in television, scoring for political thrillers and CBS dramas. Horror Express was one of his earliest forays into genre filmmaking. He didn't treat it like a B-movie. Instead, he wrote a full-bodied, thematic score, using layered violins, pounding percussion, and haunting flute motifs to underscore the mounting dread. He recorded it with a small but tight orchestra in Madrid, and he did it in just under a week. Kakavas later admitted he approached the project like it was a mini Hitchcock film, aiming for the sophistication of Bernard Herrmann rather than schlocky horror. The irony? The producers didn't know what to do with such a rich score. At one point, they considered replacing it with stock library music to cut costs. Fortunately, Christopher Lee stepped in, calling the music the film's spine, and he was right. To this day, Kakavas' score is one of the reasons Horror Express feels timeless. Its music outclasses its budget by miles. The film didn't deserve the score it got, but it made the film unforgettable. Fact 9. The religious censorship was real. At first glance, Horror Express doesn't seem controversial. No nudity, no excessive gore, no profanity. But one thing nearly got it banned in several countries: the religious subtext. In the film, a priest is among the passengers, a man of deep conviction who begins to interpret the creature's powers as divine punishment. As the horror unfolds, he begins to worship the monster, calling it an angel, believing it was sent by God to punish the wicked. That storyline's subtle but unmistakable outraged religious boards in countries like Italy, Spain, and Ireland. They accuse the film of blasphemy, arguing that portraying a priest aligning with a demon blurred the line between faith and fanaticism. The Spanish censor board nearly pulled the release, demanding that the priest's fate be changed or clarified as evil. The producers refused. They believed the ambiguity was the point, and that horror often thrives in moral gray zones. In the end, compromises were made. A few scenes were trimmed. Certain lines were softened in the dubbing process. But the core idea remained, and that idea still haunts. What if evil doesn't tempt us by appearing monstrous but by posing as salvation? Fact 10. A scene they never meant to shoot. There's a moment deep in Horror Express where a victim stumbles through the corridor, blood trickling from his eyes, hands shaking, muttering nonsense. The camera lingers. It feels too raw, too real, because it was. That scene wasn't scripted. Actor Angel Del Pozo, playing the frightened engineer, had just finished shooting a late-night take when he suddenly collapsed on set. The cameras were still rolling. At first, everyone thought he was in character improvising a breakdown, but what they captured was the result of severe exhaustion and on-set dehydration. Del Pozo had been filming for 14 hours straight. No proper food, minimal breaks. The corridor set was stiflingly hot under the lights. When he dropped to his knees and started mumbling incoherently, no one called cut. Director Eugenio Martin quietly motioned for the camera to keep going. When the scene ended, crew rushed to his side. He was fine, shaken, but okay. Later, when shown the footage, Del Pozo was stunned. "That wasn't acting," he said. "That was me falling apart." The director used it anyway, and now it lives in the film, a moment of unplanned horror, born from the body's limits. In a movie about possession and identity loss, the actor was the one losing control. Fact 11. The monster's true face was never shown. Audiences remember Horror Express for its creature. A hulking, fur-covered humanoid with glowing eyes and a face half frozen in terror. But here's the strange part: we never actually see what the monster really looks like, because the creature isn't the corpse pulled from the ice. That's just a shell. As the film progresses, the intelligence jumps bodies from the ape-man to humans, to eventually something else entirely. The rules are never fully explained. Is it energy? Is it thought? Is it something older? At one point, a character theorizes that the being is not physical at all, but a memory of the universe, a consciousness trapped in form. The final host, a resurrected corpse, speaks through borrowed voices. Its face barely moves, the eyes glow, but there's no emotion, no expression. The camera avoids lingering too long. Why? Because the filmmakers didn't want to define it. They believe that ambiguity is scarier than design, that the audience's imagination would conjure something more terrifying than latex ever could. They were right. The creature's face doesn't matter. What matters is the look on yours when you realize it could be anyone. Fact 12. The carriage that vanished from the cut. In early versions of Horror Express, there was an entire sequence set inside a special cargo carriage, a locked room containing classified Soviet tech. It added a layer of Cold War paranoia, suggesting the train wasn't just transporting people, but secrets. That carriage never made it to the final film. Why? Because the reel was lost. Not damaged, not censored, just gone. Production records confirm that the scene was shot, a tense 5-minute sequence where Cushing and Lee discover that the military is secretly tracking cosmic radiation, possibly linked to the aliens' origin. The scene hinted at an ongoing experiment, a government cover-up, and a larger story unfolding off-screen. But during editing, the footage disappeared. It wasn't a digital era. Film reels were physical. They got mislabeled, misplaced, even accidentally destroyed. By the time they realized it was missing, post-production was nearly complete. The cut moved on without it. Fans have speculated about its content for decades. Some believe it revealed too much. Others say it would have connected Horror Express to larger Soviet sci-fi traditions. But one thing's for sure, that carriage existed and now it's ghost cargo, lost in cinematic snow. Fact 13. The movie that got passed around like a curse, Horror Express, was never meant to have a legacy. In fact, after its limited European release, it virtually disappeared. For years, the film was traded not through studios, but through bootlegs. In the late 70 seconds and early 80 seconds, horror fans passed around low-quality VHS copies like Forbidden Artifacts, grainy, warped, sometimes subtitled in 3 languages at once. But they watched it anyway, obsessed with its tone, its imagery, its atmosphere. No one could quite place it. It looked like a Hammer film, but wasn't. It starred legends like Lee and Cushing, but came out of Spain. It felt British, Soviet, and Lovecraftian all at once. And then, it started showing up on late-night TV, first in the UK, then in America, under different titles: Panic on the Trans, Siberian, Night Train to Terror. Some broadcasts were missing scenes, others used incorrect music, but the damage was done. The film was out there. It didn't spread like a hit. It spread like a myth. For a long time, Horror Express didn't belong to any studio. It belonged to those who found it and passed it on, like a whispered secret. Fact 14. The man behind the monster was never credited. The physical performer inside the creature suit, the hulking, frozen humanoid that terrifies passengers, never appears in the credits. His name was Juan Olaguivel, a Spanish stuntman known for playing monsters, soldiers, and brutes in local productions. He had no lines, he wasn't recognized, but he carried the weight literally of one of horror's most unsettling presences. The suit he wore was boiling hot, made from synthetic hair and glued latex. He could only wear it for 20 minutes at a time. Visibility was near zero. In one scene, he accidentally walked into a light rig, cracking a lens, and filming had to stop for a full day. No one blamed him. In fact, Christopher Lee reportedly requested that the man be given extra pay, but the producers declined, citing union rules and contract terms. Olaguivel would later play more monsters, but none as iconic. He passed away in obscurity in the 1,990 seconds. He never got a line, never got a credit. But without him, the monster had no body. Fact 15. The shot that looks straight into hell. There's a single frame in Horror Express that doesn't behave like the rest. It appears during a mind transfer sequence the moment the creature jumps hosts. The image glitches. The screen flickers red. For a fraction of a second, the camera tilts unnaturally, catching something that looks wrong. Not a special effect, not a practical stunt. It was a camera malfunction, or that's what they claimed. According to cinematographer Alejandro Ulloa, the film jammed just as the shot was ending. The image warped, creating a burning, overexposed streak across the negative. When they developed the footage, they debated reshooting. But director Eugenio Martin said no. He believed it added something thematic, as if the film itself was being infected. The idea of a conscious camera reacting to the presence of evil became an inside joke among the crew. But there's a darker rumor that the flash frame contains a hidden image not part of the scene, not part of the set, something no one remembered filming. Some believe it's just pareidolia, others say it's a face. The film never acknowledged it, but the shot remains. A split second, a glimpse into something the train never meant to carry. Fact 16. The scene that broke Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee was never one to lose composure. Over decades of acting, he'd faced vampires, witches, Nazis, and Sith Lords without flinching. But on the set of Horror Express, there was one scene he couldn't finish. Not because of fear, but because of grief. It was a quiet moment. His character, Professor Saxton, discovers that the creature may have absorbed the soul of a child. The line was simple, understated, but every time Lee opened his mouth, he faltered. What the crew didn't know, the actor had recently suffered a personal loss connected to a child in his extended family. The line hit too close, too specifically. After 3 takes, he stepped away. Peter Cushing, himself grieving his wife, was the one who calmed him. The two sat offset in silence for nearly an hour. No words, just presence. Eventually, Lee returned, and when the cameras rolled again, he delivered the line with a cold precision that chills even now. Not anger, not sadness, just steel. Some called it acting. Others knew better. Sometimes, horror doesn't come from makeup or monsters. Sometimes it comes from being asked to pretend through pain. Fact 17. The scientist who hated his own character, Alberto de Mendoza, played Father Pujardov, the wild-eyed priest whose faith twists into madness. The role is intense, almost theatrical, with screaming monologues and ritualistic gestures. But Mendoza hated every second of it. In real life, he was a soft-spoken man of science, a trained biologist who saw the world through rational, empirical framework. When offered the role, he initially declined, calling it cartoonish. But the producers insisted. The script needed an unhinged zealot, a man who'd turn from god to monster in a blink. Mendoza agreed reluctantly. He buried himself in the role, studied cult behavior, watched footage of religious extremists. Then, when filming began, he went full tilt, hair disheveled, eyes blazing, voice cracking. The result is iconic. And yet, he later called the character everything I fear in mankind. He believed the priest was a warning, not a villain, but a mirror. Someone so desperate for meaning, he surrendered to the first power that answered. He acted it beautifully, because deep down, he knew exactly what it looked like to believe the wrong thing. Fact 18. The blood was real, kind of. There's a particular quality to the blood in Horror Express. It's not bright red like paint, or syrupy like fake gore. It's darker, thicker, it clings to skin, it stains. That's because it was partially real. Not human blood, but animal blood, sourced from a local Madrid butcher. Mixed with food coloring and corn syrup, it was used in multiple scenes for added realism. At the time, there were no safety regulations against it, and the crew didn't exactly ask questions. In the infamous eye bleeding scene, the blood is smeared across the actor's cheeks in slow rivulets. The effect works disturbingly well. What viewers don't know is that the mixture smelled awful under the hot lights. Some actors gagged between takes. One even vomited off screen. Christopher Lee reportedly demanded that the formula be changed after a close-up shot nearly made him pass out. From then on, the effects team used artificial alternatives, but the damage was done. Several of the film's creepiest moments owe their texture to that decision. It was cheaper than prosthetics, and more revolting than anything they could fake. Fact 19. The film that outlived its own negatives, in 1973, a year after its release, Horror Express was nearly erased from history, literally. The original camera negatives were stored in a vault owned by one of the Spanish co-production partners. Due to poor labeling and financial confusion, the vault was sold to a third party. That third party cleared out the reels, assuming them to be expired junk. Entire films were destroyed. Others were melted down for silver recovery. Horror Express was among them. For years, all that survived were low-resolution duplicates, TV prints, festival reels, bootlegs. The image quality degraded further with every copy. By the early 2000s, it seemed the film would remain trapped in VHS purgatory. Then, a miracle. A nearly complete 35mm print was discovered in a railway museum in the UK, part of a forgotten exhibit on trains and cinema. No one knew how it got there, but it was clean, restorable. Thanks to digital remastering, the film was finally revived in HD. Today's Blu-rays and streams exist because of that one orphaned reel. A film about resurrection was resurrected itself. Fact 20. The ending that wasn't supposed to be. The final shot of Horror Express is a cosmic nightmare. The train derailed, drifting through space, glowing with unholy energy. a surreal image that seems both metaphoric and literal, but it wasn't in the script. Originally, the film ended with the survivors walking away from the wreckage, a conventional conclusion. But during post-production, the director pushed for a more ambiguous twist. Using stock footage from a 1,960 seconds Russian sci-fi short, the team cut together an eerie epilogue. The train, now empty, floating above Earth. There was no explanation, no narration, just music. The studio objected. Too weird, they said, too abstract. But the producers were tired, the budget was gone, and no one had a better idea. So they left it in. To this day, viewers argue, was it a dream, a metaphor, or did the creature win? The film never answers. And that silence might be the scariest part. Bonus fact, the thing that spoke back. During one of the late-night ADR sessions where actors re-record dialogue, something unexpected happened. Peter Cushing stepped into the sound booth to redub a quiet scene, his character muttering a line while inspecting the frozen creature. It was routine, a throwaway phrase. He read it once, twice. Then the sound engineer paused. "Did you hear that?" he asked. They played it back. In the background, beneath Cushing's voice, there was another voice, faint, inhuman, whispering. At first, they thought it was bleed, an overlapping track, but there was nothing on the reel. No second mic, no logical source. The sound existed only in that recording, never captured again. Cushing, already a deeply spiritual man, refused to re-record. He said, "Let it stay. It suits the film." The line made it into the final mix. Most audiences never notice, but if you listen headphones on, volume up in that one moment, something answers him back. So what do you think? Was the floating train a metaphor or a warning? Did the filmmakers hide something deeper inside that frozen shell? Tell us in the comments which fact left you questioning everything, and what forgotten film you want us to dissect next. And if this journey through the dark corners of Horror Express pulled you in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us. There's always another train, and it's never empty.